folks. Welcome back to another podcast from the Utah County Republican Party. I am the party vice chair and your host, Charles Max Wood, and I'm here talking to Frank Mylar. He's one of our candidates for Attorney General. Just to set a little bit of the stage for you, at the convention, he got 59 and change % of the vote, which was like 1 or 2 votes away from winning outright at the convention. I'm super excited to talk to him. This is the candidate I was voting for at the convention. And anyway, I'm just super excited to have him here and to talk to him about what he's running for and things like that. So Frank, if people are trying to decide who to vote for Attorney General, why you?
Great. Yeah, I love this question because all 3 candidates are attorneys, right? So they're going to tell everyone exactly what they want to hear. They're not going to say anything but something. They're going to say basically that they want to defend your constitutional rights. My point is this: if they've been an attorney for so many years, why haven't they at least one time defended a citizen's constitutional rights in court? I've done it numerous times because it's my passion, and it is literally the reason I'm running. I think that was what resonated with delegates once they started hearing about my experience and that I really fight for people's constitutional rights. I think that's what turned the tide the last couple of weeks leading up to the convention.
Yeah, and it's really important. I mean, where do I even start? We keep seeing the federal government encroach on this stuff, and then you hear about some other attorney general in some other state that's fighting that fight. So like the Missouri attorney general is fighting the censorship fight, right? You've got the Texas attorney general who's fighting a whole bunch of different fights on the border. And oh my gosh, I mean, if that's one thing that's important to people, I think that's at the top of the list or pretty darn close. Do you have any examples of specific things that you fought for or fought on our behalf?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could start literally probably any issue you want to name, and I've probably helped fight to vindicate people's constitutional rights. I've worked with the Immigration Law Institute dealing with immigration issues. I've worked fighting the feds. I filed a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court just 3 or 4 weeks ago, fighting the federal encroachment against using Utah land in eastern Utah. So these issues are all theoretical with my opponents. And they say they're going to do them, but I'm already doing them. I already know how to do them. I know how to lead. And I think that's the case, is that they say, oh, well, you don't need to have this experience. But how do you lead if you don't have the experience in the trenches? That's the question.
Right. That makes sense. I'm going to push a little bit because I tell people all the time, podcasting is storytelling, right?
Right.
People want to hear what you did and what the details were and why it matters and all of that good stuff. I think before the call, you mentioned that you had done a case on COVID.
Yeah.
And boy, that's an issue that gets people fired up, right? We had to wear the masks. We had to shut down our businesses. I mean, people are ticked. So what was your experience fighting on behalf of people during the COVID scare?
Sure. Yeah. And this is something else that really highlights the difference between me and the other candidates. Nobody called the other candidates and said, hey, what are our rights during COVID? But a lot of people called me because I'm known as a constitutional rights attorney.
Okay.
And so people called me and said, hey, can our church still meet? And others said, can our school meet? Because if you have a private religious school, you can't exist online, right? You have to be in class. And so
I saw my kids try and exist online, and I mean, for one of my kids, it almost worked, right? But she was pretty self-driven. My other kid,
yeah.
My high school kids, it was a joke.
Well, it is especially hard to pay, the private school fees,
right,
when you're not in the classroom, and so, but in any event, I was able to tell them the truth. And nobody, the AG didn't articulate this. Nobody really articulated this. But I looked at the statute and the law, and I said, no, you are not a place of public accommodation, number one. Number two, you have this thing called the First Amendment that gives you religious expression and exercise rights. And so I said that I would help them if the authorities came after them. Thankfully, no, they never did. They met, and everything was, pretty decent. It wasn't like California where they, John MacArthur, they tried to pull out the police on him and drug him into court. And thankfully he was exonerated somehow. But in any event, That was one of the areas. The other thing is I do a lot of work with Alliance Defending Freedom. And I
love those guys.
I really want the listeners to know this organization. It is the premier organization that fights for our constitutional rights, especially kind of the moral-based constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm.
They defended the state of Idaho's pro-life laws just 2 weeks ago in the U.S. Supreme Court. 3 weeks ago, they defended or fought against the abortion pill in the U.S. Supreme Court. So they are everywhere fighting. They're fighting to protect women's bathrooms and sports. You name it, they're there. And I've done a lot of work with them. They called me up during COVID and said, Frank, because I'm an honor corps attorney with them. It used to be called honor guard, then they changed it to honor corps. So you might see it differently in some of my pamphlets. But it means I've spent thousands of hours helping vindicate people's constitutional rights. So I'm on their list that they call when they need help. And so they said, Frank, can you help us help people get religious exemptions to the vaccine? And this was right after Biden mandated that all healthcare organizations that basically did business with Medicaid or Medicare, which is just about everyone, that they had to have everyone vaccinated. And you would not believe it. I help people get these. I did not charge them a dime. And some of them fought it so amazing. It was crazy. It was like I was fighting the ACLU on some of these.
Really?
Yeah, it was like they were saying, well, we want to know the address of your pastor and his phone number. I go, no, you don't get to know that.
Wow.
We want to know the address of your church. We want to know whether you've had any other vaccines, just all this stuff. And because
I remember that's a rider on the First Amendment, isn't it? That you have to have your pastor's address.
I think they think so. It's bizarre. But I just went through the list and I said, no, you don't need to provide this, 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 and this. It's your personal conscience that matters here. And by God's grace, everyone I helped got the religious exemption, including my daughter, who's a nurse at Primary Children's Hospital. So
awesome.
And so, I never, I've always taken the position, if a person wants a vaccine, I'm not going to say they can't. I'm not like anti-vax in the saying that nobody should get them. I mean, a lot of people do a lot of things that I might not approve of, but I don't want to do things. I don't want these vaccines mandated on anybody, especially when, it really wasn't clear at the time. And it's even more clear now. And there's some downsides to them.
Right.
And so very fatal downsides, actually. And but there's also really good religious reasons to say, I don't want these vaccines.
Right. So just to kind of extend this into the attorney general arena, right? Because it seems like you as an attorney, as a constitutional attorney, you've represented individuals or maybe groups of people, So the attorney general, you're essentially doing the same thing, except that for the state, right? And the people of the
exactly.
state.
So for instance, during COVID is a great example. I would come out because we're going to have another one of these, right? I mean, I don't think COVID's the last thing, the last word on the subject, especially when the Democrats realized how helpful it was to them, in 2020. I think that when that happens, I will come out with a statement and give my legal opinion. And I will say that no one can be fired from their job for not getting the vaccination, that there's privacy laws like HIPAA that prevent employers from inquiring into their medical conditions. Yeah. And I don't know why HIPAA went out the window, during COVID. It was ridiculous. But I raised it. I said information about it, but apparently the federal government never seemed to care at all, and a lot of other businesses. And so I don't want anyone to have to, get fired from their job like they did. A lot of people got fired or coerced into getting the vaccination when they did not want to. And I do not want that happening. I want religious institutions to feel like they are exempt from meeting requirements. And the other thing by the way, about the religious exemptions on meeting requirements, both religious schools and churches, they are not like going to Home Depot.
That's so true.
You by and large, I mean, I know there's visitors, by and large, it's the same group of people all the time, right? The odds of spreading are minimized in those kinds of situations. When you go to Home Depot, it could be anyone from anywhere in the world could end up showing up at a good-sized Home Depot.
Yeah.
And so these are things that I would step out on. I would say, look, these are your rights. Employers do not fire. State do not fire. Local governments do not fire. And I
Right.
would even go so far that if someone got terminated, that I would want to join that suit, because it is the public I represent. It isn't just to defend the state at all costs. If the state has done something wrong and wronged somebody, I'm not going to just say, oh, well, let them just fight it out. And that's honestly, that happens in the parental rights context a lot, and in a number of other areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to go into the parental rights arena a bit. I know we're kind of talking about the constitutional law stuff, but I mean, this is one area I live in. There are a couple of other areas I want to get to, but with the whole parental rights, as far as like school choice or being informed if your child comes to school and tries to socially transition or things like that. I mean, where's the line for you on that? And at what point can you intervene as the Attorney General?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the line is pretty simple, that everyone should look at the authority for schooling emanating from the parents. It shouldn't be this top-down attitude. It shouldn't be the State Department any more than it should be the feds, telling it should be basically an understanding between the parents and their school. And so that's one thing. And the parents' word needs to be looked at as supreme. I actually fought a case that went to the Utah Supreme Court that stated that absent an adjudication in court of abuse or neglect, the parent makes the decisions for that child.
Amen.
And that's across the board. So that's going to be pronoun usage. It's going to be bathroom usage. You name the issue. Curriculum issue, absolutely. Going to school board meetings and not being kicked out. I've actually represented people in schools. I've actually been in front of school boards, and let me tell you, they weren't foolish enough to kick me out when I was exercising the First Amendment rights on behalf of my clients. But parents have been kicked out of school board meetings for very peacefully reading sections in a book that they allowed in that library. That's just simply wrong.
Yeah. Well, during COVID, now we're blending the two. During COVID, I don't know if you know our county clerk here in Utah County, Aaron Davidson.
No, I
don't. He and a bunch of other parents during COVID went to a school board meeting, and the school board barred the public from entering the building while they were having the meeting. And they were citing the COVID regulations to say that they didn't have to open the doors. And also stated that they could participate over Zoom, but they couldn't participate in person. And so of course, Aaron and one of the other parents got on a bullhorn and were, telling people to honk their horns and stuff to let them know they were there. Well, the school board, and of course they did this in a closed session, so we don't actually know what they said, right? But the police were called and they pressed charges against two of the parents. Wow. Aaron Davidson was one of them, and the other one started a homeschool co-op. But our current Attorney General declined to prosecute the case against Alpine School District for violating open meeting law.
Well, that is something that, and I'm very familiar with open meeting law. I was over records for a while in the Department of Corrections, and I was also over that in state government in general sometimes. And so I've actually given advice saying, look, you can't just close a meeting because you don't like what you're going to talk about, or you don't want anyone to hear about it. There has to be some pretty defined reasons. And one of them, of course, is litigation. You don't want to give litigation strategy, but that's pretty narrow, really.
Yeah.
It's basically, usually it's the attorney or the county attorney that's actually giving direct advice to that council or to that group, and nobody gets to hear that because it's, there's attorney-client privilege there. But absent that sort of a thing, what they think about the case or other comments, those are not necessarily things that you can close a meeting for. So yeah, I think one of the things I think would be very helpful that I would do is kind of come up with some sort of you can call it like a Bill of Rights or something for the public, to let them know their rights in a meeting, their rights to peacefully state things,
right,
their right to be able to record what's going on.
I like that.
The rights to get records. A lot of them don't know that. Sometimes they give them incorrect information. For instance, they could shut down a records request by saying that will be $392.
Yeah.
And yet
they do that.
Yeah. And yet there may be a legitimate public reason for that. And those are instances where the government is supposed to waive those fees, but they don't usually tell you that. They just say, oh, it's $392.
Yep. So getting back to, constitutional rights, or maybe, rights that we have under the law, like the records requests, right?
Yes.
It's not a constitutional right, but there's a state law that gives you the right to ask for that stuff.
Correct.
Let's dive into some of the other areas of being attorney general, because attorney general isn't just this particular area of, of things, right?
Yes.
So what else does the attorney general do?
So there's three main areas in the attorney general's office. I'm the only one running that's actually worked in all three of these areas.
Okay.
The first area is actually criminal law.
Okay.
There's criminal prosecutions. Usually it's any kind of fraud you can think of. I actually had my first felony fraud trial within 2 years of graduating from law school while I was an assistant attorney general. There's welfare fraud, there's insurance fraud, there's election fraud. So
our county attorneys don't handle those?
Typically, it's actually the AG's office that does those kinds of things. And so, and then there's antitrust laws, and these are things that are uniquely state prosecutions. There can be some of the porn laws are dealt with by the AG's office. Some of the sex crimes task force are headed up by the AG's office. So that's an important area. Then, in addition to that, is criminal appeals. A lot of people don't know this. I've actually worked on criminal appeals also. And the AG's office actually handles all felony criminal appeals in the state. So it may have started in a county and the criminal didn't like the result. He's going to appeal it. How many times do you think they might not like the result? Right?
Every time they're found guilty?
It's probably not quite that bad, but well, they might not like the result. You're right, but they're not going to appeal every time. But they appeal a lot, and so that's important. Another layer of that is I also
hang on. So sure. on that count, when you say you handle those appeals, meaning that you provide the prosecutor for those cases?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So so basically, what happens is, and I've done civil and criminal appeals. So the civil, the criminal case, they have a trial, the person's convicted, and they say, well, I didn't have an adequate attorney.
Right.
Or the search was unconstitutional, there wasn't probable cause.
Okay.
And so then it goes up on appeal, and the appeal courts and the Supreme Court ultimately decide whether any constitutional rights were violated. Typically, they are constitutional rights that are on appeal. Not always. That makes sense. But it could just be some prejudice of some sort. That ultimately, I guess, is a due process issue then, if there was some prejudice. But that is something that the AG's office does. Another layer is dealing with the Department of Corrections, the Board of Pardons, adult probation and parole. And again, I have done that also. I got admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1993 because I had a writ by a prisoner. And that was trying to seek release from the Board of Pardons. And so the Board of Pardons basically becomes kind of like the judge, the court, once somebody is convicted of a crime.
Right.
And so any issues relating to sentencing, the crimes, whether they can be sentenced concurrently or consecutively, those are all issues that end up being laid at the feet of the Board of Pardons.
Right. So,
that's 1/3 of the office. The other third is probably litigation, where you're defending the state and agencies, including schools and school districts and universities. That's something I've also done. But then the other third that isn't spoken of very much is the legal counsel. So it could be Department of Air Quality, Department of Health. I've done Department of Health before. Human Services, I've done that before. Department of Corrections. So, but it could be any state agency or school that is needing legal advice. And part of that flows from that is Attorney General opinions, which are very important because they're kind of taken as law, and sometimes they're not always as well drafted as they should be.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious as we kind of back up into some of these.
Sure.
So if you're helping out a state agency,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what that looks like. Does it look like just any other attorney-client corporate law kind of thing, or how is it different from what you would kind of expect from, hey, I have my company and people are putting up legal challenges to what we're doing?
Yeah. And this is so important for listeners to understand why I need to be the Attorney General, because I understand these nuances. Almost everyone that's an Attorney General that gets elected has never faced the dilemmas that I've faced with an agency doing something wrong. And that you represent the public. The public is always, always my client. Now, it may be that it serves the public to fight to the death to defend the state. Mm-hmm. And I do that. And I gained respect from the agencies I've worked for because they know I'll do that. If we didn't do anything wrong, we will fight it all the way. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why I've had so many jury trials, is because sometimes the jury has to decide. But on the other hand of that is that if we're doing something wrong, you don't just say, okay, well, let's help you do it wrong. Let's just cover it up. Let's not give any records out. Let's keep it quiet. Let's just railroad someone's constitutional rights because they don't have an attorney, or maybe they have a terrible attorney. Any of those could be possibilities. Or they have a good attorney, but you're still going to fight him to the death on this. That's simply wrong. If there's a clear violation, and let me tell you, once in a while there is. I came across it every once in a while. And as a state attorney general, it's our obligation to do what's right and not just to defend at all costs the agency. And like I said, I've been in that position. I speak from experience. If you're respected, that agency respects you. And it's one of the reasons why when I went into private practice 24 years ago, I started representing a lot of sheriffs, because even though I'm a private attorney, I get to do justice. It's the same thing.
Right.
If we screw up, I tell the sheriff and the county attorney, we screwed up. We need to settle this. And I'll tell you, there was a case. It doesn't happen very often. I'll be honest with you. Especially defending law enforcement. Law enforcement usually gets it right, but they do not always 100% get it right.
Right.
And so I've been on the other side, defending the sheriff, defending Department of Corrections, and saying, wait a minute, we screwed up. We need to settle this because it's the right thing to do. And I've done that, in a few cases. In fact, one case we actually gave out $500,000 because it was the right thing to do.
Makes sense. So I have a couple more things that I kind of want to hit. I'm trying to decide which one to ask first. Let's go with this one. What are the things that people don't understand about the Attorney General? And specifically, what don't they understand that makes them either care about the wrong things or not care at all?
All right. Well, one thing is there's a little bit of a misnomer in being what's called the chief law enforcement officer of the state. We do enforce the law and investigate on certain state affairs. The bulk of prosecutions are sheriffs and county attorneys all over the state. And I'm the only one that's actually worked with both of those entities. I've actually taught at their annual conferences, both the prosecution conferences as well as the sheriff's conferences. And so it's a huge help that I already know the players of the game, but there is a leadership component in that. Now, if you have zero criminal law experience, how much do you think those county attorneys and sheriffs are going to follow you if you do try to lead?
Right.
They're not. You don't have any respect. And but they know me. They know that I know what I'm talking about. and they trust it. And there's literally no question about that. And so I think that's going to be a very important thing. The other thing I think that the public doesn't realize is the sway that the AG's office has on these agencies, and we often don't use it when we should.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if they're doing something wrong, we should call it out.
Right.
And it's also these AG opinions. There was an AG opinion given to the schools that was not based upon valid Supreme Court precedent.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's literally based upon what they call a plurality, and that plurality had three justices.
Wow.
And they cited it as if it was valid binding precedent. And this is really a problem when that happens. And then the schools get poor legal advice from the Attorney General's office. And I think it's why there's some exceptions that I don't like, with respect to the women's sports and women's bathroom bills. There really should never be any exceptions in the schools, at least, to those to women's bathrooms and women's sports.
Yeah. Well, on that count, I completely agree with you. I mean, I have a daughter in high school, daughter in junior high, and a daughter in elementary school.
Yep.
I have a son in high school and another son in junior high as well, and I don't want it going either way, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, why should I worry about going into this private space and being vulnerable for a few minutes while I take care of business?
Yeah.
Why should I be worried about who's in there with me?
Well, and actually, I have 5 kids too.
Yeah.
3 girls and 2 boys, and they're all graduated now. But I can think back very clearly. I was in, I was helping coach. I didn't go into the locker rooms, as a coach. It's so ludicrous, the idea that some kid could get testosterone blockers and suddenly it's okay to those girls that he's coming in there. We need to start shining the spotlight on the true victims. It's the girls being victimized anytime a boy goes into their locker room or shower.
Yep, absolutely. And why should they have to worry?
Yeah, they shouldn't.
Yep. Yeah, we had an Elephant Society dinner, and we had Mike Kennedy come and talk about all the research he did putting together that the transgender transition law.
Yes.
For children under 18. And I mean, this is the other issue that I don't see with it is, and I know we're getting a little off topic, but it's something that really hits home to me, right? Because if there's going to be a guy in the girls' locker room with my girls, there are going to be 2 guys, and it's the other guy's going to be me dragging his behind out of there.
Yeah.
But it's the science doesn't support any of this.
Nope.
But at the end of the day, we have these laws, and it sounds like you're willing to enforce them, which is important.
Well, I'm even willing to do more than that. I believe there's constitutional rights that those girls have, both to freedom of religious freedom and expression, as well as privacy rights that would negate having a boy in their bathrooms or showers. And that's all there's to it. And like I said, and this Title IX issue is people need to know about Title IX. This is not new to me. It is new to probably the other candidates. I've actually fought Title IX cases in schools. But
really?
this Title IX issue is where Biden tried to redefine gender to gut the purpose of Title IX. And I'm going to tell you this, there is never a reason to allow a boy to participate in sports either. And I'll tell you this, it's dangerous.
Yes.
You get contact sports, even maybe not a contact sport like volleyball isn't as contact-ish as some. You could absolutely a boy could harm a girl with that additional strength that they have, even in a game like volleyball. But of course you could in soccer and in lacrosse and in basketball. And it's actually very dangerous, for women to be playing with boys. Right.
So I guess this kind of leads back to the Attorney General discussion in a sense, because let's say, and I know that every case is a little different.
Yes.
But let's say that you run into a case like this, where some school is allowing a boy to play on the girls' team of whatever sport, right? And so, you become aware of it, you decide that you're going to take this case on. What's your process for deciding this is something that A, you can win, and B, what's your process for then evaluating what the right way to handle it is?
Yeah. Well, let me first of all, as a private attorney, I'm the only one in this case that's really had to evaluate private clients, these kinds of constitutional issues, and determine, am I going to turn this into a constitutional issue or not? And so
Right.
I've had that practice. I've done so. The most often place I've done that is in juvenile court, where
Okay.
I believe that the guardian ad litem, the state, the psychologists, the caseworker, were all gunning for my client who did nothing wrong. Literally, I was able to prove that they were wrong about my client. And there's been several cases, but one of them, they came in, they wanted her to submit to having a DNA test on her child to check, because the child was seen by Primary Children's Hospital, and the physician there said that she doubted failure to thrive, and then she put familial short stature, and noted that the mother's father was 5'6", the mother was 4'11", and that she was like 5'1". And so why would it be surprising that this child is under the 5th percentile, right? And they instead, DCFS, looked at this as a legalistic way, under 5th percentile. And they did something worse, I think. This woman was part Native American, part of a Native American tribe from Oklahoma, the Choctaw Indian tribe. And they, I think, in a prejudicial way, assumed that she was an alcoholic because her husband was, that she divorced and was abusive. Right. But she was not an alcoholic. She did not drink alcohol.
Right.
And because she's Native American, and the Native Americans often have, there's the history sometimes of abusing alcohol. Oh, here's another Native American, 5th percentile. She must be abusing alcohol and harming her child, because they came in and they said she refused to do any DNA. She said, no, I'm not going to do this, because I know what you're going to do. You're going to cut the size of a quarter on her head, and it'll be a bald spot there. And she said, no, I don't want to do that, and I don't need to do that. And I've already had the doctor look at my child, and the child was doing fine, by the way. It wasn't like sick, or, it was,
yeah, but the mom was short.
Yeah. Anyway, they got the police, DCFS, Division of Child and Family Services, pulled the police in on this and made them come in and arrest and handcuff her and took her child.
Oh my gosh.
So that they could force doing the DNA test. And that's when I got involved. She called and said, this is what's happened. They've taken my child. I called DCFS. I called the Attorney General's office. I said, what authority did you just handcuff and take the child without a warrant?
Right.
You know what the response from the Assistant Attorney General was? I don't have to talk to you. You haven't done a notice of appearance of counsel.
Oh, gosh.
There wasn't a case yet. They had just taken the child. I didn't have a case even. You see, and that was the snippety response from the AG's office about it. Guess what? We won.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet.
And guess what we did, what I did after we won? And this is something, again, that my opponents have never, ever, ever done this. But after I won in juvenile court, the next week, I filed a Section 1983 case for violations of her constitutional rights by them wrongfully. And I'll tell you, since they brought the police in, I sued the police. Because the police have no right to rely upon DCFS's faulty judgment as to whether there's probable cause. That officer is a sworn officer. He or she has to make their own independent probable cause and should not have been relying on DCFS. And so they had to cough up money. The state had to cough up money. And I've done this on more than one occasion. In fact, 3 times I obtained substantial monetary sums for my clients for their constitutional rights being violated by DCFS. And so this is something that, I've done on an ongoing basis, but what I had to do is I had to evaluate the case. I'm hearing it. I'm going,
Right.
okay, this is a significant case. And I look at a lot of things. I look at this client's going to be a good witness. You look at all those kinds of things that you would normally look at, and before you go forward and turn it into a constitutional case. So the way it will work in the AG's office, it'll be, after that juvenile court case is over, or after some action has happened. They closed the school board meeting. They kicked out a parent in the school board meeting. There will be a record to review.
Right.
And I can review that record and see whether there was a constitutional violation or not.
Right.
And if there is, we need to take action.
Makes sense. So the other question I have is, and this is something that you usually hear people ask more of, like the legislators, or maybe the governor candidates. And, it's kind of well, what are you going to do when you get elected? Right. Because the legislators usually have some bill they want to push, or some, some issue that they want to pursue. The governor is like, yeah, I'm going to put my weight behind these kinds of things. Right. And I'm going to sign bills to this, extent, find people in the legislature to help me pass stuff. The attorney general is a little bit different, but what are you looking to do when you get elected?
Sure. Well, one thing I'll tell you is that many times I have gone to the legislature and argued for or against bills.
Okay.
Now, that is something the Attorney General's office should do. The Attorney General has not done that hardly at all. The last several of them have not done that. They're missing in action. When it's an important piece of legislation, like the women's sports or bathrooms, I'm going to come down, and I already have an agenda. I have a legislative agenda. If I win this primary, I'm starting the next day, June 26th. And I'm going to start meeting with legislators. I'm going to do things to turn off the faucet of illegal immigrants. I'm going to go to them with a bill that I've already have in my mind, partially drafted, that's going to make it a felony to help, aid, abet, or fund bringing an illegal alien into this state. I'm also going to ask them to pass a law to make it a felony for an illegal alien to come into the state on their own free will, and that they are deportable as soon as they appear in this state. And so what closing the faucet will be, those airline pilots, those bus drivers, they're not going to come into the state knowing they could face a felony.
Right.
They'll lose their license. And then, airline pilots make decent money. They're not going to do it.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. And so that will close the faucet. Then it will be rounding up the people that New York's dumped in our state. And I'll probably have to dump them back in New York, because no other government's going to take it. A lot of people don't realize this, but these illegal aliens, they have documentation. They just throw it away before they get to the U.S., because they need that documentation to go from country to country to country to get to the U.S.-Mexican border.
Right.
And so once they throw that away, how am I going to get them into Mexico? Or they'll say they're not Mexicans, they're from Iran, or they're from China. And so, but what I will do is dump them in New York. New York is a sanctuary state. Let's give them some more sanctuary.
Yep.
So that's
what you said you wanted.
So there's some issues like that the Attorney General's office, the Attorney General should lead out. And that's part of how you fight this immigration. You can do some fancy things like file briefs with Ken Paxton, and I'll do that. I'm not going to say I'm not going to do it, but I'm not going to say that it does very much. It doesn't do much more. It does a little more, but it's not much more than the governor sends 50, guardsmen down to the border. It's window dressing. It's window dressing because Ken Paxton's actually the guy fighting it. It's actually Texas that's fighting it, and we're just going to help him fight it. So it's about time that the AG starts doing something to really join the fight. And that's what we can do. We can protect our border, and we need to do it. Title IX is another example. Arkansas, they basically came out and said, we don't agree with this interpretation of Title IX, and we're fighting it. Other states are fighting it. Utah hasn't fought it yet. that's a thing you can bet on, that I'm going to be fighting that, and I'll be using the laws that have already been passed to strengthen that fight, actually. Because sometimes it does matter under the 10th Amendment and the 9th Amendment. It sometimes actually matters what state law actually says.
Mm-hmm.
Have we taken over the area that is our jurisdiction under state law? And that helps in my legal analysis in fighting federal encroachment.
Makes sense. What would you change within the AG's office?
All right. Well, there's I'm not going to be too public about this. There's some areas that I'm concerned about, and that I'll be looking at that very carefully because I've had some experience. I think there's some areas that are really excellent, and so that's good. But one thing that I will do differently than the other candidates is I actually have an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, and we learned some things in that class, that coursework, and one of them was called Management by Wandering Around. And they talked about Sam Walton visiting every Walmart store while he was alive. Every one of them he would visit each year. I'm going to visit every single section and division all over the state at least once a year and try to meet with all of the attorneys, not necessarily separately, but at least in groups. I'm going to actually meet with them. That's not being done. That's part of management. And I'm going to ask those attorneys and paralegals and secretaries and staff and investigators, what do you need to do your job better? What can we do? I do that. I have my own private law practice, and I do that from time to time. And some people want stand-up desks. So I go, okay, let's get some stand-up desks.
Right.
And other people said, I feel like I could use another monitor. I've never used two monitors. I actually have one big monitor, but fine. Everyone's different, right? And it makes them more productive. It's a good thing to do. And so there's things like that, just helping them do their jobs better. Some, I think, need training in certain areas. That's something that we should always be about, is trying to have better training so we actually know how to do our job better. So that's an area that I'm actually going to pay attention to, the actual human management part of that job. It's not just that you don't just sit around on a silk cushion. I think some people think that. And you never go to the legislature, you never meet with your staff. I'm gonna make that a big difference. It's going to be that I'm going to meet with the legislature. I'm going to meet with the governor, whomever they are. I'm going to meet with my staff, and make sure that that we can do things in the best way possible.
Nice. So one other thing and I keep hearing this, and I don't know where it's coming from.
Sure.
But my understanding is that there are people that are trying to put up a referendum to make the attorney general appointed by the governor. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's actually, I guess, the governor's brother-in-law from Utah County, a legislator, I believe, and he was introducing a pre-bill because he wanted it studied. You don't study the issue unless you're getting ready to have a bill.
Right.
I think it's atrocious. It's an outrageous power grab. It's shameful. It's shameful because it's not just the AG, it's the state auditor, it's the state treasurer, and it's the state school board.
Right.
All of those groups need to be independent, especially the attorney general's office and the auditor and the treasurer. These are things that you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realize it's an important part of checks and balance. And the thing that I love about our Constitution is the framers really understood that when they talked about separation of powers and how you need to separate things. And they did so on the federal level. And the state level, there's some different nuances. It turns out that in a state affairs where you're dealing with different things than you are on federal affairs, right? You're supposed to be dealing with health issues, divorce issues, criminal issues, education issues aren't supposed to be federal. All of those are uniquely things that should be done by the state. It makes it even more important then to have a separate elected attorney general and auditor and treasurer, because then they can then serve as a check against abuses of power. And the worst thing you could ever have is for someone to try to control the legal counsel, because that can be used as a weapon. what are we seeing on the federal level, right? And you know where it started?
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, Janet Reno, who worked for Bill Clinton, started investigating people that were sidewalk counselors and would show up in front of abortion clinics as if they were criminals to be investigated. Right. And so if you like what's going on with the FBI these days, then I suppose you should like the governor to be able to appoint the attorney general.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, what you're talking about with the separation of powers and the point that you're making specifically with the attorney general of the United States being appointed by the president is, then you don't have this independent agency within the state that can do what it needs to do without first looking over its shoulder at the governor to see if he's okay with it.
Right. And law shouldn't be politicized.
Right.
And that, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You really need a seasoned attorney, not a bureaucrat, not a politician, not a lobbyist, as the next attorney general, because it needs to be somebody that understands the law and will let the law speak for itself.
Yep.
And not politics.
Yep. All right. Well, I think I've kind of gone to the end of the questions I have. Are there other things that people should know about as far as the attorney general or this race or anything like that?
Sure. So let me talk about some of the other issues that I've been involved in that relate a little bit. Okay. Again, I'll tell you this, that a lot of people don't know this, but the attorney general actually has the right to get involved in private lawsuits and even private criminal proceedings, or not private, but criminal proceedings, if there's constitutional issues at stake. And they often never do, but I actually did. When I was an assistant attorney general, I actually joined in to a private suit because there are constitutional issues at stake. And so that's why I know you can do it. And so I actually defended pro-life sidewalk counselors in front of an abortion clinic in downtown Salt Lake who were being criminally prosecuted for exercising their First Amendment rights.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it sounds unbelievable, right? It may sound even more unbelievable in Utah County or some of the other counties. Like, that doesn't really happen, does it? Well, 2 of them were prosecuted. There's a group of them, so I don't know why they decided that 2 out of the 10 were going to face criminal charges.
Right.
But they did. I defended them and went to trial. We won, and I didn't charge them a dime. And this is something that, as an attorney general, you could actually join in and say, this is wrong. They have free speech rights. Right. And they should join in on these. Another thing I did was I represented the Highway Patrol Memorial Crosses. In that case, there was not an aggressive attorney that seemed to care a fig about religious freedom or the law enforcement officers. And
what was the challenge? That they were crosses or that they were there?
Yeah, it's a little bit odd that it is even a religious freedom case, right? Because they're memorial crosses for the officers.
Right.
But the American atheists are like vampires. They hate crosses. They literally hate crosses. And they literally said this in their depositions, that every time they see a cross, they think of Jesus Christ. And they say that.
Good for them.
I know in some ways that's good. I'm glad they are. But it's their venom, the hate they have for it is unbelievable. Right. And so these memorial crosses were being attacked, and they were trying to say that we had to take them down. We never took them down. We did have to, for a while, we had to put this crazy thing on it while we were litigating certain issues that said this is not a religious memorial. This is not this is a private memorial or something like that. And literally we had these signs that we put on it just to keep the judicial people at bay. And but by God's grace, we do have them on there. We had to make some tweaks, but we have those crosses. All of them are up along our roads. And that was something that I got involved in as a private attorney, did not charge the association a dime. And that's the kind of thing that an attorney general does, right? And
well, you would think so.
So what I will do is, so I did that in conjunction also, both those cases that I mentioned, the pro-life case, as well as the Highway Patrol Memorial Cross case. I did that in conjunction with Alliance Defending Freedom. And when I'm Attorney General, I'm not going to sever that alliance. Right. Every time there is an important issue, they are coming with, I'll fly them out, and I'll tell you, they will help us. Let me give you, can I give you another example of a religious freedom case? So I
But
ran
this
for
stuff fascinates me because it's like you can't just leave people alone and let them believe what they're going to believe.
well, the interesting thing is that I ran for attorney general actually in 2000 against Mark Shurtleff. I said then you need an attorney, not a politician. Unfortunately, they elected the politician and they got it. They got what they asked for. But I will say this, that during this time, people knew that I cared about the Constitution then, and I still do now. Now I've got a lot of cases that show that I care about the Constitution. But a city attorney from Pleasant Grove called me up, and she said, Frank, they're trying to take down our 10 commandments in our park. Other cities have already taken theirs down because of this threat of this lawsuit. I've talked with the mayor and he doesn't want to take them down. Can you help us? And I met with both of them. I said, tell me about this. What does the park look like? What else is in that park? I'm asking these questions because I have fought religious freedom cases.
Right.
I know the field. If you're not in the ballpark, you don't know the issues to raise.
Right.
If you've never been in the ballpark, if you've never played ball. And what I told them was this. I said, the mayor and the city attorney, I said, let me tell you this. You have a very defensible case that can win. And number two, I can find you one of the best attorneys in the country to fight this, and they won't charge you a dime either.
Right.
And I mean, it's hard to understand what music that is to the ears of someone that wants to protect the 10 commandments in their city, and they're a mayor and a city attorney, and you know that you have to dig out of your own pocket to fight these cases because they don't ask for damages.
Right.
It's not no insurance company, no trust or UCIP or risk management. No self-insurance is going to cover that sort of case. And so they would have to dig out $500,000 or more in fees. What I got was, through working with Alliance Defending Freedom, we got Frank Mannion from the American Center for Law and Justice, who actually took the case, and then Vernal joined in because Vernal didn't want to take theirs down either. They heard what Pleasant Grove hadn't taken theirs down, and they said, "Well, we don't want to take ours down. We're joining." So Frank Mannion, excellent attorney, one of the best attorneys on 10 Commandment litigation. He took it. I think he won in the lower court, lost at the 10th Circuit, and won a great decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. So instead of losing ground like people are doing, that's how we're losing ground. We're losing ground in these constitutional issues because people are caving. The Alliance Defending Freedom was started so people would stop caving to these crazy demands. And so as the Attorney General, I will not only offer to help cities when they're in this dilemma, I'm not going to just do it on my own. I'm going to bring in the Alliance Defending Freedom, the American Center for Law and Justice, Immigration Law Institute, all the best legal minds in the country to help us fight to win. And people really don't understand this. And no attorney general in our state's history, I don't believe, has really networked with the best attorneys in the country like I will, because I'm already doing it. I'm not going to just sever those ties. And what they don't understand is other states are, like Idaho, I said, they actually hired but didn't pay a dime, Alliance Defending Freedom to defend their pro-life laws. The state of Colorado, the Republican Party for the state of Colorado hired the American Center for Law and Justice, and they donated their time defending them before the U.S. Supreme Court when Trump was taken from the ballot. And again, as you probably know, it's a 9-0 decision they got. But again, it wasn't some highfalutin, fancy Denver attorney that doesn't have a clue to how to fight these cases. That's what we do. We go downtown to Main Street in Salt Lake. We find some big, high buck attorney who's never fought these cases before, but sure knows how to charge a lot, and we pay outrageous sums. When I was in the office, we did that with the abortion litigation. And ostensibly, it was because we didn't have an abortion expert in the AG's office. Well, neither did they. Right. They weren't an abortion law expert. And probably half the firm probably was for abortion, actually. But you go to American Center for Law and Justice, you go to Alliance Defending Freedom, these kinds of organizations, they love to fight these cases with a passion,
Right.
and that's what I want. I want people who have a passion to fight these cases, because when we fight Title IX, I want to win it.
Oh yeah.
I'm not in there for glory. I'm not in there to make friends of law firms downtown Salt Lake.
Yeah.
I want to win this because that's my passion, is fighting for these rights.
Yeah, you win it definitively.
Yep. Yeah, and it can be done. And that's just the thing, is that my competitors have never been involved with organizations like this,
Right.
and neither have other attorneys. Sean Reyes hadn't.
Yep.
Mark Shurtleff hadn't. John Swallow hadn't. None of these other attorney generals have actually networked with these kinds of constitutional law firms.
Right. So I guess the question is, because this, we're kind of talking about all these different issues, abortion, Title IX. Another one that I hear a lot is public lands.
Yes.
So which of these issues are you planning to take on once you're elected? And
there, without a doubt, all of them.
Are there others that I didn't list? And
so
what are you planning to do?
Yeah, I didn't really talk a lot on the federal land, but this is a passion of mine because, one, I love rural Utah. We camp a lot, we ride motorcycles in it, and our kids play basketball in a lot of places in rural Utah, and we love it. And we know that these ranchers are being kicked off their land. We know that ATV enthusiasts are being kicked off using federal lands more and more. And we know that cities and counties are not able to maintain their roads because they're regulating them to death and preventing it. And even just normal transportation, like through Tooele County, they need to come across a piece of federal land, and the feds are obstructing it, saying, no, we don't want you to. Even though there's a road there. And that's the same thing,
right.
That we've seen in rural Utah, where the feds will say, oh, those aren't roads. You can't maintain them because it's not a road. Well, anyone can look from an airplane and say, that's a road. That's not a trail. That is a road. There's no like grass in between two tire ruts or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a finished road. And so one of the things I'm going to do, if we get a Republican president and Congress, I'm going to run through that window that we failed to in 2016. People were asleep at the wheel in this state in 2016, because if they were primed and ready for this, they would have the legislation ready. They would be getting Congress on board. We would get state laws passed to do everything for a full court press. I help coach basketball, so I use a lot of these basketball analogies. But a full court press is a full court press. You don't just use one little thing, right? You're going to close down every option that you can to fight this. And that's the kind of thing that we need. And I literally will not stop until land is deeded to Utah. It shouldn't always be we're begging to use this land that nobody cares about. I mean, you look at, I've seen this land, you look at the Grand Staircase, the Bears Ears. There's a couple nice features. They're pretty small. They're very small, nice features. The vast majority of it looks like wasteland. It looks like cattle ranching land. It looks like ATV land. But you know what? There's coal under there, and there's natural gas or oil.
Right.
And the fact is that we should own those lands.
Yeah.
And I have a plan to actually sue the federal government that's unique, that I don't even want to say it yet, because I know my competitors will probably jump on it. But I literally have a plan to get that land deeded back to Utah.
Well, I think the thing that people don't understand about the public lands, because it's not just about, hey, we live here and it's all around us, and so controlling gives more control to our lifestyle.
Yeah.
The thing that hits home to me, so just to give you a little bit of context for my background.
Yeah.
I was on the board of a charter school for 12 years. And
Excellent.
One of the big things we did every year was determine what we were going to do with the school land trust land.
Yes.
Or money. And that amount goes up every year, and that's because the state treasurer does a terrific job managing that fund.
Yeah.
But the thing that's really makes it hard is that, so it's like 1 parcel in 10, I think, is the way that it works.
Hmm.
So if they build a mine on public lands, then the schools get 1/10 of whatever comes out of that mine, right?
Yeah.
In profit.
Hmm.
And so they are literally taking money away from our schools by maintaining control over those
They
public
are.
lands that should be the states,
Yeah.
along with all of the other issues, right? Because yeah,
Right.
my wife grew up in eastern Utah in Emery County, and
Okay.
yeah, they just go out to the desert
Yeah.
just to be,
Hmm.
and why not, right?
Right.
Nobody else out there, right? Find a nice camping spot. Maybe somebody else finds the same nice camping spot the next weekend. Yeah, why
Yeah.
not? What's the harm in letting people use it? And so, yeah, I really feel you on that one.
So the first issue is that they're abusing their ownership. They're abusing it in having more and more ridiculous regulations. And that's why I joined in this suit in Eastern Utah, was to fight to allow a railroad to be built to be able to transport waxy crude, which is actually a very environmentally friendly
Mhm.
oil because it's wax. It's like
Right.
paraffin wax, and it's not going to spill if there's an
Mhm.
accident. And yet they're trying to regulate them to death on these things. Ranchers,
Right.
like I said, they're and
Oh,
what
yeah.
the thing that ticks me off is we should not be begging them to use our
Mhm.
land.
Right.
It's Utah. Now, why did Utah and Nevada end up on the raw end of this deal? Every other state pretty much got land given to them and deeded to them by the federal government after they became a state.
Mhm.
What in the world is the reason that the federal government is maintaining so much land? It's wrong, and I'm
Yep.
literally not going to quit until we get land, lots of land, deeded back to us.
Right. Cool. Well, we've been talking for like an hour.
Well,
I want to make sure that we cover everything, but why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background? So,
sure.
not necessarily, I guess your career background, but like, who are you? Where are you
Yeah,
from? What are your ties to Utah and
yeah.
everybody else here?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit unique in some ways. First of all, I've been married to my wife Debbie for 36 years, and
Wow, congratulations.
she's a biblical counselor. She and I are also certified Christian conciliators, and
Oh,
we
cool.
often try to help reconcile marriages and other disputes using the Bible as a
Mhm.
primary way to do that. And we've been doing that for years, actually, a couple of decades anyway. And we have 5 children, and 5 grandchildren. All of those are from our eldest child. So the others haven't started yet. A son just got married in March during the campaign. I had to go
Uh-huh.
to Phoenix. I had to miss the Washington County convention because I was at my son's wedding, and I'm glad I did it. It was already
Yeah.
prearranged for over a year that we were going to do it. I'm not going to change the
Yeah.
wedding. And in any event, then my other son, oldest son, he got married just in September, and so 3 are married. Rachel and Rebecca haven't been married yet, and but they're all graduated from college, and
Uh-huh.
we have. So I was actually originally more from the Seattle area, and my wife
Mhm.
more from the Boston area. I went to
Okay.
Seattle. I went to high school in Seattle. Went to a very conservative college in Chicago, Wheaton College.
Uh-huh.
Um, that my And then I went back to Seattle University for law school. My wife Debbie, she went to high school in Boston and went to Boston University. And the fun thing is, and what I like to tell people is, I didn't grow up in a particularly conservative family.
Right.
They loved the Kennedys.
Uh-huh.
My family, mom and dad loved the Kennedys, all of
Uh-huh.
them. And I started having a change. And I think the big thing was in my life that about ninth grade, I started really feeling like God wanted me to read the Bible every day.
Mhm.
And I started reading it in ninth grade. Nobody told me to. I
Right.
don't even think anyone knew I was. No one encouraged me to. I just started doing it, and that's what's really framed and centered my life. And I started becoming more conservative, even though I was living in Seattle,
Mhm.
going to Seattle school, And believe it or not, there were interesting debates in issue classes, and I would speak up on these issues. And of course, 3 or 4 students would always come to me after class and said, "Oh, thanks so much for speaking up. I wanted to say it, but I didn't,
Right.
And so I started really realizing there's really an important need, to speak up on these things, because a lot of people are afraid to. They believe the same way that I do, but they're afraid to.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I also read Milton Friedman's Free to Choose around this time. And a lot of people don't know that book, but it's a very fantastic book. I became an economics major in college with a minor in history and political science. And I started really, again, as a conservative college, I started really feeling like I need to become a lawyer. So I want to do something with my life. I want to do something with the Constitution.
Right.
I want to do something. And I took this American history class I kind of had a minor in history. And we looked at it was microfiche back then.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have computers, right?
Right.
And I was reading these letters from our founding fathers, and I was reading the Federalist Papers. I was reading the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution, and I was just surprised and blown away. Wow, these guys really had religious fervor. These founders. Nobody told me that in my schooling in Washington State, and I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I had been deceived, in some way, that here's this information that I'm learning, and I feel like it's like I've been defrauded in some way. Anyway, when I went to law school, actually had a conservative constitutional law professor, which was unusual in that law school. But everyone else was pretty liberal. And there was another conservative professor too. There's probably 2 conservative professors, and I loved them. They were fantastic. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I knew, okay, I definitely need to become I want to really fight these issues. And at the time, I met my wife. She was in a master's program in the University of Utah at the time, and mm-hmm. working as a director of physical therapy at the University Hospital. And so we had a long distance relationship, and I just said, well, you're in the middle of your master's. Let's just move to Utah until you're finishing your master's program. And we just fell in love with Utah. So we're not from here, but it's right. been our home for over 36 years. And people don't know how they take this for granted. The outside world is not like this. It's not family friendly. You can't relax a little bit on Sunday. You have to work all the time. Right. Just little things like that we don't have to play any sports on Sunday. Everyone's in agreement. We're not doing it. Mm-hmm. Just little things like that. People take it for granted that they've lived in Utah all their lives, and they don't know the treasure that it is to have a state community that supports the family.
Right.
And so that's been, we've loved that. We're like I said, we've raised all of our 5 children here, and 4 of them are still here. And anyway, so one will probably be back sooner or later.
Good deal.
Probably more information than you needed, but
no, I like it because, how do I put it? Like we think about candidates or politicians as sort of this, hey, we're going to take all of the things that they said they were and just plug them into this spot.
Yeah.
And for me, having been a candidate, I ran for the state Senate and I run for local school board.
Great.
You get to know the other candidates, right? You even as a delegate, you get to see it some. You realize, no, these are people, right?
Yeah.
I like getting the personal details because it shows what kind of person you are. It shows what you care about, right? And the fact that you went to your son's wedding instead of trying to make him reschedule it or whatever, and you had real stakes in this race, right? That shows what you value. You talking about being a counselor, biblical counselor, that shows what you value. And for me, that's just as important as what you're going to do, right? Because if you have a certain kind of character, that's the kind of person that I want to be electing and representing me and fighting for me. And so anyway, it's really interesting to see that, right? And sometimes you only see it when somebody speaks at the convention or yells at the delegates at the convention, or how they act when they're talking to people at their booth,
Hmm.
or what they show up to and what they don't.
Hmm.
And so, right, that personal level of things, that's important. So anyway, um I think what I'd like to do, just to wrap up, is if people want to support your campaign, right, whether they want to put a sign in their yard, or they want to go knock on doors for you, or donate, or whatever, like, where do they go for that kind of a thing?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Yes, one of the things that's fun about this campaign is we have a lot of volunteers, but let me tell you, we need a lot more. We also do not accept money like my competitors do from like corporations and from special interest groups and lobbyists. So I need more people to donate to my campaign to make this work. What I found out before the convention was we just needed to get the message out, and people
Hmm.
were going to my side. I got on some podcasts. People started hearing me. They started switching to supporting me. And so, what we need to do is get the message out, and that takes money. So, if you go to Mylar and the number 4ag.com, Mylar4ag, it's Mylar, like the balloons. And you will immediately see a donation tag there that you can click on, and you can donate straight from the site. You can also, if you have one of these flyers of mine, a lot of them have these QR codes on them. And whoops, I was going the wrong way there on that QR code. And you can just, you know, take a picture of that with your phone and actually donate straight from that as well. Also on my website, mylar4ag.com, you can actually volunteer. There's a volunteer slot. You can send emails to us. My email, by the way, is mylar4ag@gmail.com. And we love getting emails. We have people that look at them. We try to get back to them. I try to personally respond to them when I can. There's a lot of them, of course, but that's something. We also have signs. We've given out like about 3,000 signs, and we need to give out more. We need to
Hmm.
cover the state in signs, because that is huge free advertising. And what it also tells people is this person is actually supported by people, not just corporations and big entities. And that's kind of counter to the conventional wisdom of the handlers. They want you to spend money on TV and stuff. I don't know if I'll get on TV. It depends on how much money I actually do raise. I raised about 50 grand at the convention and won it resoundingly. My next competitor had spent over 100 grand, and the other competitor spent over 350,000, and both of them lost at the convention. So
Hmm.
but the point was, one, I had volunteers that really helped a lot, and two, we spent the money where we needed to, and we'll do that again. We're fighting this to win, and I believe we will win if the word gets out. So no donation is too small, or too large for that matter. But but if honestly, like if 100 people give $100, that's $10,000 right there. We can do a lot with $10,000. So
Yeah.
yes, I do want to encourage everyone to go to my site, mylar4ag.com, and volunteer and to donate.
Yeah, I just want to let people know too. It seems like, so just to give an example with the signs, right? I live
Yeah.
back in a neighborhood off of Main Street in Lehigh, right?
Hmm.
And so no one's going to see it except my neighbors.
Hmm.
But my neighbors see the signs, and then they come over and they go, "Okay, why do you have that sign in your yard?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
And
so
people
we
visit
have the
you, right?
conversation. Yeah.
Plumbers come, electricians,
Yep.
contractors. People have people over at the home. School buses. All these different things. It multiplies as the day goes on.
Yep. Yep. So every little bit helps. One other thing that I've seen people do is, if you have something to tweet out or share out on Facebook, right? So you see a message from Frank, or you just want to let people know, hey, I like Frank because he fights for, and there's a great story on this podcast that I heard, right? All of that helps out, because then people get to know who he is.
Yeah, and that's really a good point. Share these podcasts, this podcast, share it with friends,
Yep.
and other ones. We have some others on our site that we can share. We're also we do some on Instagram. They're really short, and so that's easy to send a 30-second little blurb, to your friends. And we also have YouTube, so you can find a lot of things on YouTube. Actually, there was some really helpful video that somebody did on YouTube that I didn't even know was there. And it was talking about me running for AG.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Just once again, that's Mylar, MYLAR, 4AG.com. Go donate, go request a sign, go let them know what you're willing to do to help. And yeah, thanks for coming, Frank.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem.